The first thing my dad said that changed everything was, "Promise me you won't laugh." I thought he was about to confess something serious. Maybe he'd lost his job. Maybe he was sick. The silence in our living room felt unusually heavy as rain tapped against the windows, and he stood there holding an old cardboard box like it contained a lifetime of secrets. "I found this in the attic," he whispered. He placed it on the coffee table and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were elegant dresses, neatly folded scarves, costume jewelry, and a pair of carefully preserved heels. Everything looked decades old. Yet every piece had been cared for with astonishing respect. I looked at him confused. "They belonged to your grandmother," he said softly. "She worked in community theater. Sometimes when actors didn't show up, family members filled in. I even had to play female roles a few times." I blinked. "You?" He smiled nervously. I was terrified. "But those plays taught me something important." "What?" He looked toward the hallway mirror. "Clothes can change how people see you, but they don't change who you are." Those words stayed in the air long after he finished speaking. Then he surprised me even more. I've always wondered what those performances actually felt like from the audience's perspective. "Would you try it with me? Just once. For fun." I stared at him. Growing up, Dad had always seemed fearless. Seeing him nervous made the request feel strangely meaningful instead of silly. At first I laughed. Not because I wanted to mock him, but because I simply couldn't imagine us doing something like that together. He nodded. "I knew you'd think it was ridiculous." He started closing the box. Something stopped me. Maybe it was the disappointment on his face. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the realization that parents are people with forgotten stories long before they become parents. "Wait." He looked back. I didn't say no. His expression changed instantly. For the first time in years, he smiled like an excited teenager. That weekend we decided to visit a costume shop several towns away where nobody knew us. We agreed on one rule. No pretending to be someone else. We weren't trying to fool anyone. We weren't making fun of anyone. It was simply a theater-inspired experiment. A chance to step into unfamiliar shoes and understand how appearance influences confidence, assumptions, and identity. The shop owner welcomed us warmly without asking awkward questions. "Looking for costumes?" she asked. Dad nodded. "A little personal experiment." She smiled. "Then have fun with it." Her kindness immediately eased half my anxiety. As she helped us choose outfits, I realized something unexpected. She wasn't focused on making us look glamorous. Instead, she kept asking questions. "What style feels comfortable? What colors make you smile? What helps you feel confident?" Nobody had ever asked me questions like that while shopping for clothes. Dad noticed my surprise. "Interesting, isn't it?" I nodded. "Very." Later, standing inside the fitting room, I hesitated before looking into the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't someone else. It was still unmistakably me. Just different. Different colors. Different posture. Different expressions. Different emotions. I expected to laugh. Instead, I became unusually quiet. Because for the first time I understood something I'd never considered before. Changing clothes was easy. Facing your own assumptions, that was much harder. When Dad stepped out of his fitting room, he looked equally uncertain. We both burst into laughter. Not because we looked ridiculous, but because we could see the same nervousness reflected in each other's eyes. The mirror in the center of the shop suddenly became more than glass. It became a question. How much of confidence comes from ourselves? And how much comes from what we believe other people expect to see? We had only just begun asking that question. And neither of us realized the biggest challenge wouldn't happen inside the costume shop. It would begin the moment we walked outside. The bell above the costume shop door chimed softly as we stepped outside. And for a second neither of us moved. The afternoon breeze felt colder than it had a few minutes earlier. It wasn't the weather. It was awareness. Inside the shop, surrounded by costumes and stage lights, everything had felt playful. Outside, the sidewalks, parked cars, and passing conversations reminded us that the world rarely knows the story behind what it sees. Dad glanced at me and gave a small smile. "Still okay?" I took a slow breath. "I think so." He nodded. "Then let's just walk." Sounded simple. It wasn't. Every step felt louder than the last. I caught myself wondering if everyone was looking at us. A teenager across the street glanced our way before returning to his phone. An elderly couple smiled politely as they passed. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve, curious for a moment, before they continued shopping. Most people simply carried on with their own lives. That surprised me more than anything. My imagination had been far louder than reality. Dad leaned closer and whispered, "Funny, isn't it? What? We spend years worrying about strangers who are usually too busy living their own lives." I laughed quietly. I guess you're right. As we wandered through the shopping district, we passed a large bookstore with floor-to-ceiling windows. The glass reflected our figures like another mirror, and I instinctively looked away. Dad didn't. He stood there for a moment studying our reflections. "What do you see?" he asked. "I don't know. Try again." I looked once more. First I saw unusual outfits, then nervous body language, then something else. Two people trying something unfamiliar together. Nothing more. Nothing less. Dad smiled. "That's what I hoped you'd notice." His words settled somewhere deep inside me. For years, I had judged people from a distance without realizing how little I actually knew about their stories. Standing there, I understood how easy it is to make assumptions from appearances alone. Our walk continued until we reached a small cafe. I hesitated. Should we really go in? Dad shrugged. If we're comfortable enough to walk outside, we can certainly order 2 hot chocolates. The cafe was busy. The moment we entered, conversations continued. Cups clinked against saucers, and the comforting smell of fresh coffee filled the room. The cashier greeted us with the same cheerful smile she offered everyone else. "What can I get for you today?" Her normality dissolved another layer of my fear. As we sat near the window, Dad stirred his drink absent-mindedly. "You know," he said, "when I was your age I thought courage meant never being afraid. And now?" He looked at the steam rising from his cup. "Now I think courage means admitting you're afraid. And taking one more step anyway." I watched the words disappear into the quiet between us. That sentence felt bigger than our little experiment. It applied to almost everything in life. Jobs, dreams, friendships, being yourself. After we left the cafe, the sky darkened, and light rain began to fall. We hurried toward the parking lot, laughing as the wind tried to pull at our umbrellas. For the first time all day, I wasn't thinking about what I was wearing. I was simply enjoying the moment. Then my phone buzzed. A message from one of my closest friends. "Hey, I think I just saw you downtown. Was that really you?" My heart skipped. The confidence I had slowly built throughout the afternoon suddenly cracked. I looked at Dad. He noticed my expression immediately. "What happened?" I showed him the screen. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the rain-covered windshield, where our reflections blurred together. "The mirror keeps asking the same question," he said quietly. "What matters more, who you are, or who other people expect you to be?" I stared at the unanswered message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I knew whatever I typed next wouldn't just shape my friend's opinion. It would reveal something about my own honesty. And for the first time that day, I wasn't sure which answer scared me more. My thumb hovered over the screen for what felt like forever. I could have ignored the message. I could have invented an excuse. I could have said, "You must have mistaken me for someone else." Instead, I looked at Dad. He didn't tell me what to do. He simply smiled with the same quiet confidence he'd carried throughout the day. "Whatever you choose," he said, "make sure it's an answer you'll still be proud of tomorrow." I took a deep breath and typed. Yeah, that was me. Dad and I were trying a community theater costume experiment. It turned into a surprisingly meaningful day. I hit send before I could change my mind. The 3 little dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then came back again. My heart pounded. Finally, the reply arrived. "Honestly, that's pretty unexpected, but kind of cool. You'll have to tell me the story sometime." I blinked. That was it. No jokes. No insults. No dramatic reaction. Just curiosity. I couldn't help but laugh. Dad looked over. "Good news. The best kind." He smiled and we started driving home through the gentle rain. The windshield reflected the streetlights in long golden streaks, and for a while neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence felt comfortable now, not awkward. When we reached home, we carefully packed the costumes back into the same old cardboard box. Dad folded each piece with the same care I'd noticed earlier. I finally asked the question that had been on my mind all day. Why did you keep all of this? He rested his hands on the box for a moment. Because every time I thought about throwing it away, I remembered something my mother used to tell me. He looked toward the hallway mirror. A mirror only shows the outside. Character is what stays after you walk away. The sentence settled deep inside me. That mirror had followed us all day. In the costume shop, the bookstore window, the cafe glass, even the rain-soaked windshield. Each reflection had shown us something different, yet none of them had revealed the most important part of who we were. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the experience. At school, I caught myself being slower to judge people. The quiet student who always sat alone. The classmate with an unusual fashion style. The neighbor everyone seemed to misunderstand. I realized how many stories I'd never bothered to imagine. Then something unexpected happened. Our local community theater announced they needed volunteers for an upcoming charity performance. Dad looked at me over breakfast. What do you think? I smiled before he even finished the question. I think we should help. A week later, we found ourselves backstage surrounded by costumes, paintbrushes, and nervous performers of every age. Some had years of experience. Others had never stepped onto a stage before. Nobody cared who normally wore what. Everyone cared about telling a good story. Watching people encourage one another reminded me that creativity has a way of bringing strangers together. Behind the curtains, labels mattered far less than kindness and teamwork. As rehearsal ended, the director thanked everyone. Before leaving, I caught my reflection in one of the dressing room mirrors. This time I didn't stop because I was unsure. I stopped because I recognized the person looking back. Not because of the clothes, not because of the hairstyle, but because the uncertainty I'd seen there only days earlier had slowly been replaced by quiet confidence. The mirror no longer felt like a judge. It felt like an old friend, reminding me that appearances may change from moment to moment, but integrity, compassion, and honesty are the things that truly define us. Then Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. I think, he said with a grin, there's one more thing we should do after the performance. What? He smiled mysteriously. You'll see. For the first time all week, I had absolutely no idea what he was planning, and somehow that made me even more excited for what came next. The night of the charity performance arrived faster than I expected. Backstage buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that only live theater can create. Volunteers hurried from one side of the stage to the other. Someone was practicing lines under their breath, and the sound of the audience settling into their seats drifted through the curtain. Dad adjusted the costume he had worn during rehearsals and looked at me with a calm smile. Remember how this all started? I laughed. With an old cardboard box. And a promise not to laugh. I nodded. Funny how far one conversation can take you. The performance itself felt like a blur. We weren't the stars of the show. We were simply part of a group telling a story together. Every scene was met with applause, and every volunteer supported the next person without hesitation. Standing under the stage lights, I realized something unexpected. A week earlier, I had been afraid of being seen. Now, I was grateful to be part of something bigger than myself. When the curtain finally closed, the audience stood and applauded. It wasn't because of perfect costumes or flawless acting. It was because everyone on that stage had given their time to help the community. Backstage, the director thanked each volunteer personally. You reminded people tonight, she said. That theater is about empathy. Every role lets us see life through someone else's eyes. Those words stayed with me. As we packed our things, Dad smiled. Ready for the surprise? I raised an eyebrow. I've been waiting all week. Instead of heading home, he drove to the old community center where he had performed as a teenager. The building had been renovated, but the stage was still there. A caretaker recognized him immediately. You actually came back. Dad laughed. I told you I would someday. The caretaker unlocked the empty auditorium for us. Rows of silent seats stretched into the darkness. Dad walked slowly onto the stage and motioned for me to join him. This, he said, is where I learned my biggest lesson. He stood in the center of the spotlight and looked out at the empty chairs. When I was your age, I thought people remembered every mistake I made. I thought one embarrassing moment could define my life. He smiled gently. But years passed and I realized something. What? Most people remember how you made them feel, not what you wore. The sentence echoed through the quiet theater. I looked around at the empty seats. The fear I'd carried for so many years suddenly seemed much smaller. Dad handed me the old cardboard box. I think it's yours now. I looked down at it in surprise. I can't take this. I think you should. Why? Because it isn't a box of costumes anymore. I opened the lid. The clothes were still neatly folded. The scarf was still resting on top. But they no longer represented uncertainty. They represented courage, curiosity, empathy, a reminder that understanding another perspective can change your own. I closed the lid carefully. We should keep the mirror too, I joked. Dad laughed. No. Why not? Because you don't need it anymore. On the drive home, I watched the city lights pass by the window. I thought about the frightened version of myself who had stood in that costume shop days earlier, unable to meet his own reflection. He hadn't disappeared. He had simply grown. I learned that confidence isn't something you put on like an outfit. It grows each time you choose honesty over fear, kindness over judgment, and curiosity over assumptions. The old cardboard box now sits on a shelf in my room, not because I wear the costumes every day, but because it reminds me of the day my father trusted me with one of his oldest memories, and in doing so, gave me one of the most valuable lessons of my life. Whenever I catch my reflection in a mirror now, I remember his words. Clothes can change how people see you, but they don't change who you are. And every time I smile at that reflection, I know the real transformation never happened on the outside. It happened in the way I learned to see myself and everyone else.